afternoon, everyone. Welcome to New Art Exchange Online. Thank you for joining us today for this special online event as part of Nottingham MELA 2021. Nottingham MELA is a weekend takeover of New Art Exchange, full of music, dance, poetry, workshops, family-friendly events, and more. This year, we're also offering a digital program with 3 online events for you to enjoy from the comfort of your own homes. This weekend is full packed of activities, so if you want to find out more, please go to New Art Exchange's website and check out timings and events. This online program is curated in collaboration with the AHRC-funded project On Page and On Stage, celebrating Dalit and Adivasi literatures and performing arts. This project is led by Dr Nicole Thiara, co-director of the Postcolonial Studies Centre at NTU, and Dr Judith Misrahi-Barak, from the Research Centre Emma at the Université Paul-Valéry Montpellier 3 in France. Nicole and Judith are here today and they will tell us a bit more about this project, and they will also introduce today's event and our guests. But before we start, I'll just go through a few housekeeping notes for you today. While delivering content online, New Art Exchange strives to create a safe and secure environment where guests, staff and audiences can work together and confidently and in mutual respect. This event is being recorded today and it will remain online for future reference. To ask any questions during the Q&A, you can use the chat feature on YouTube. If we get a lot of questions, we will curate them for our guests today. Do feel free to talk to one another or make any other comments as well on the chat. And finally, the work that we do means a lot to us, so we would love to hear from you. We will post a link to an online survey towards the end of the event on the chat as well, so if you could please take a few minutes to complete that survey, it would really help us continue to do the work that we do. And now, without further ado, please welcome Judith and Nicole.
And Judith will tell us more how we fared so far.
I'm also delighted to be able to welcome you all to this online event. So Nicole has just referred to the network we have put together. And in fact, we had only just completed the first series of events for that network when Europe actually was hit by the first wave of the pandemic, as you all know. So the events that were organized in Paris in March 2020 were in-person events. So probably the last in-person events that were organized in France at that time, just before the lockdown began on March 16. Those events were hosted by several multimedia libraries in partnership with La Ville de Paris, as well as l'Institut Français en Inde. And we eventually, of course, had to postpone the remaining events, but in Paris, we were fortunate enough to be able to welcome and to host 3 wonderful poets from India, Mudankudu Chinnaswamy, Jacinta Kerketa, and Jamila Nishat, who was also accompanied by Uma Damodar Sridhar, her translator. And as you may know from the program, Uma and Jamila will also be with us on Friday. So we are very pleased to restart the series with the NAE and the Nottingham MELA today. The online events and the weekend to come and all the conversations will hopefully tide us over until we can resume in-person events with our partners in the UK and in India.
Thank you. So this is the first event of a series of 3 events that are organized by the Nottingham MELA, the New Art Exchange, and our AHRC-funded network On Page and On Stage, celebrating Dalit and Adivasi literatures and performing arts. Before we let you enjoy the event with Anjali Kajal and Kavita Bhanot, I want to briefly draw your attention to the 2 other events that will take place on the weekend. The one that Judith already hinted at is the one on Saturday, the 11th of September at 4:30 p.m. And this is Jamila Nishat's Cavalry group Shaheen, who will perform a couple of songs and talk about their really important work with Uma Damodar Sridhar and also one of the performers. And on Sunday, the 12th of September at 2 p.m, we will screen 3 short films by the Adivasi filmmaker Seral Murmu. And this event will also be followed by a conversation with him and a few of our doctoral candidates at NTU, and questions and answers can also be asked through the live chat. So we hope to see you there as well. And today we have the great pleasure to welcome you to a conversation between the writers Anjali Kajal and Kavita Bhanot. Anjali Kajal is a short story writer from the Punjab, and Kavita Bhanot recently translated some of her short stories from Hindi into English. She was also honored by the Punjabi Hindi Sahitya Academy in Jalandhar for her contribution to Hindi literature in 2003. And Kavita Bhanot is a Birmingham-based writer who edited an anthology, Too Asian, Not Asian Enough, and another one called The Book of Birmingham. And she's also currently editing an anthology on decolonizing translation with Jeremy Tiang from Tilted Access. She's a research fellow at Leicester University and a founder of the Literature Most Full Collective, and I'm sure they'll tell us more about it. So finally, before we leave you, so I just wanted to thank Anjali and Kavita so much for doing this, and I also want to thank NAE so much for making this possible. In particular, merci Santos Mir, who has helped us organize this, and it has been also a lot of fun in the making. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me, Anjali?
Yes, hello Kavita, hello everyone.
Hi everyone. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to get the video work with Anjali. So it is a pity because it would have been really nice to be able to see both our faces. But we will have to make do with the audio. But hopefully you'll still enjoy the conversation between us. So I'll just introduce a little bit about myself and my relationship with Anjali. We've known each other for about 15 years. I met Anjali around 15 years ago when I was living and working in Delhi at a mutual friend's house. And we just hit it off immediately. We both early on in our writing, in our 20s, and the kind of passion and empathy and earnestness I saw in Anjali when she was talking about her writing, but also the things that she wrote about, justice, the lives of women. I think that's very dear to Anjali's heart. So our friendship started around that time, about 15 years ago. I was living in India for a few years, and I came back to England. I started a PhD. I returned again to Delhi and lived there for a couple of years. So even when I've been away in England, we've kept in touch and spoken frequently on the phone, and then WhatsApp has been amazing because it's made it so much easier to keep in touch. So what's happened over all these years is that we're just constantly sharing our lives and having long conversations about life, about politics, about our writing, about writing or not being able to write at times. Our lives have kind of been different, or they've overlapped, but it is a very, very special, very beautiful friendship. So this event in some ways is about sharing that friendship, and also just a glimpse of those conversations, but centering more on Anjali's work and her short stories in particular, as well as her thoughts. And something else which I should share is that apart from the friendship, or alongside the friendship, because there's no separation, we've also been sharing our work. And while I was living in Delhi, Anjali would often read her stories in Hindi to me, and I could understand, but I couldn't read very well. But she would read her stories, and I loved her stories for the compassion, which I think I didn't actually often see. I think this is one of the key qualities. I didn't often see that in the literature that I was reading, as well as the sense of injustice, the politics, with a big P and a small p, the deep empathy and emotion, which also is often missing in so much literature, especially in English. I did slowly start to read in Hindi, and was able to to start reading Anjali's stories, and then eventually it was always an intention, but in the last few years, with a mentorship with the National Centre of Writing here, with Jeremy Tiang, I was able to translate some of Anjali's stories, which has also been a really rich process that has kept us connected, talking about her work very closely. So I want to start off, first of all, we're going to be having a pretty informal conversation. We didn't want this to be kind of question and answer. We wanted it to flow in the way that our conversations so often do, between the personal and the political, between our work and our lives. So I'm hoping that that's what this conversation will be. But I want to just start off, first of all, by asking Anjali to read from her first short story, and we will be interweaving short readings with our conversation wherever appropriate, both in Hindi and my translation. So could I ask you, Anjali, first of all, to just start with the reading from Itihas, history, and I'll follow that with the translation, and then it would be great to start speaking.
Thank you, Kavita. Thank you for having me in this conversation. I think I'll be speaking in Hindi. That will be more comfortable, and I will be able to communicate myself well. So, as Kavita said, I will start with my first story, Itihas. I'm reading an extract. कॉलेज का पहला दिन मैं कभी भूल नहीं सकूंगी। 15 साल की भावुक नादान लड़की, दुनिया की हकीकत से अनजान, जिसने बाहर की दुनिया नहीं देखी थी, जिसने सरकारी स्कूल से आगे कुछ नहीं जाना था, और कॉलेज में उसे मिले मगरूर चेहरे, बेरुखी से भरे लोग और चमक दमक से भरी कोई दूसरी दुनिया। उसके अंदर कुछ सिकुड़ सा गया था। फिर एक दिन जब कक्षा में कोई अध्यापक नहीं था, कुछ लड़कियां अंधाधुंध दाखिल हुई। बिल्कुल फिल्मी दृश्य था। उन्होंने ब्लैक बोर्ड पर लिखा, वेलकम न्यू कमर्स, पर उनके चेहरों से नहीं लग रहा था कि वे हमारा स्वागत करेंगी। फिर वे चुन चुन कर लड़कियों की रैगिंग करने लगी। उन्होंने अपने ही जैसी लड़कियां चुनी, आधुनिक परिधान में सजी सुंदर चेहरों वाली लड़कियां। फिर उन्होंने पूजा खन्ना को बुलाया। उसके बालों को कुछ इस तरह बांधा कि उसका चेहरा देखकर सब लड़कियां हंसने लगी। पूजा आहत थी। हंसो हंसो, सब हंसो, मेरी बेइज्जती जो हो रही है, उसने लगभग रोते हुए कहा। मुझे गुस्सा आया, मैं खुद को रोक नहीं पाई। मैंने उनसे कहा, ये ठीक व्यवहार नहीं है। उसके बाद तो जैसे मुझ पर पहाड़ सा टूट पड़ा। मैं अकेली रह गई। कोई मेरे लिए नहीं बोला। मेरा जितना हो सकता था मजाक उड़ाया गया, जब तक कि मैं रोने सी ना हो गई। बहस करते करते अचानक वे लड़कियां मेरे ऊपर अपना दबाव बनाने के लिए इतना करीब आ गई कि उनमें से एक ने मेरे हाथ पर हाथ रख दिया, जिसे मैंने झटके से हटा दिया। उसने मुझ पर व्यंग कसा, ऐसे हाथ क्यों झटका मेरा? आई एम नॉट अ शेड्यूल्ड कास्ट। मैं बस देखती रह गई। एक कसक दिल में आज भी है। मुझे इतना धक्का लगा था कि मैं कुछ कह नहीं पाई। मेरा दिल तब टूट गया जब खुद पूजा ने भी एक बार मेरे पास आना जरूरी नहीं समझा। कुछ दिनों बाद मैंने कॉलेज के नोटिस बोर्ड पर कॉलेज के प्रिंसिपल की ओर से नोट लगा देखा, रैगिंग इज स्ट्रिक्टली प्रोहिबिटेड। ये तो कॉलेज के पहले दिन की घटना थी, पर उस कॉलेज में मेरा कोई भी दिन आसान ना था। उसके बाद एक सिलसिला सा शुरू हो गया उपेक्षित होने का। ऐसा करके उन्होंने दिखा दिया हमारे बीच सदियों के फासले हैं, कि जाति से अलग हमारी कोई पहचान नहीं है। पर भविष्य में इसी उपेक्षा ने हमें आग दी थी कुछ कर गुजरने की। हमारे संघर्ष और तेज हो गए थे। ये सच था कि अगर हम आरक्षण से यहाँ नहीं पहुंचे होते तो आज जो हम हैं वे नहीं होते। हम अपनी बस्ती के ही राजा होते। यहाँ आने से हमारे संघर्षों को तेजी मिली। मुझे आज भी याद आती है मेरी बस्ती की लड़कियाँ साइकिल से दूर कॉलेज पढ़ने जाती, एक साथ निकलती, अकेले निकलती लड़कियाँ। इनमें से कुछ लड़कियों को तो घर से कोई प्रोत्साहन भी नहीं मिलता था पढ़ने का। अपनी मुश्किलें भी वो किसी से कह ना पाती। घर वाले खुद ही इतनी दयनीय हालत झेल रहे होते कि उन लड़कियों को आगे बस शादी ही दिखती, जिसके बाद सारे रास्ते लगभग बंद हो जाते थे. This is the first extract, Kavita.
Thank you, Anjali. I'll just read the translation, my translation of the extract you just read, and then we'll talk about the story. History. On that first day, while sitting in class, before the teacher came in, some random girls walked into the room. It was like a scene in a film. They wrote on the blackboard, "Welcome, newcomer students." But from their faces, it didn't look like they were interested in welcoming us. They started picking out girls one by one. This was the infamous ragging I'd heard so much about. They only picked the girls who were like them, wearing fashionable clothes with pretty faces. They called on Pooja Khanna and tied her hair in such a way that everybody started laughing at her. Pooja was tearful. "Yes, go ahead and laugh," she said to everyone through her tears. "After all, I'm getting humiliated." I became angry and couldn't hold myself back. "This is wrong, you can't do this," I said. After that, it was like a mountain fell on my head. I was left all alone to defend myself. Nobody spoke up for me. I was mocked and ridiculed until I was on the verge of tears. Trying to threaten me, the girls came closer and closer. One of them got so close she put her hand on mine. I instantly flinched as if I had been burnt. "Why did you pull your hand away like that?" she snapped. "I'm not a scheduled caste." I was left staring at her. That moment still remains in me today as an ache in my heart. I was so shocked and hurt I couldn't even reply. My heart broke further because Pooja did nothing to stand up for me. Some days later, I saw a sign in English on the notice board. "Ragging is strictly prohibited." That was the first day, but not a single day in that college was easy for me. After that first day, I was ignored. That was how they showed that there was a distance of epochs between us, that they don't consider us to have any identity beyond caste. Today, it is this disregard, this treatment that is giving us the fire to resist, and our resistance is spreading like wildfire. The truth is, if it wasn't for reservation, we wouldn't have got to where we are. We would remain kings and queens of our bastis only. I often remember the girls from my basti. They would cycle long distances to college, the girls all leaving together, cycling together. Some of these girls received no encouragement from home to study. They couldn't share their difficulties with anyone. What could their families do? They were enduring so much hardship themselves. The only way out for these girls seemed to be marriage. But surely after that, all the doors would be closed to them. So this is an extract of your first short story, Anjali. Do you want to talk a little bit about this short story? What motivated you to write it? How you ended up writing it, publishing it, and starting to write?
Yes,
and
Kavita,
yes, if you feel comfortable speaking in Hindi, I can translate.
Okay. This story was published in 1999 in a reputed Hindi literature magazine, Hans. This story came from experiences of the girls from Basti. I myself was from that Basti. So what we were facing in the college, what we were like, all the environment was totally different for us, where we were coming from. So that motivated me to write the story. And besides, we will talk about how I started, how the story got published. This was also another story itself. So Itihas was my first story, and it was when it was published, it got so much response from audience that it was translated in some other languages of other states of India. Like it was translated in Marathi and got published in a magazine it was also translated in Gujarati, and some plays were also conducted on this story. So the response was really, which I never thought in my life that I will get for this story, and it's really opened a way for me to go ahead in literature. So this is what I want to say about Itihas.
You told me once about somebody in your college who encouraged you to perhaps write this story or to send it to Hans.
हाँ, ये सब बहुत इंटरकनेक्टेड है कविता, कि जैसे मैं कॉमर्स बैकग्राउंड से थी, मैं हिंदी लिटरेचर में कैसे आई, हाउ आई स्टार्टेड राइटिंग इन हिंदी स्टोरीज. एक्चुअली जहाँ दैट वाज एन एलीट कॉलेज वेयर आई वाज स्टडी, और पंजाब में एकदम हिंदी लिटरेचर का बहुत ज़्यादा माहौल नहीं है, ये हम जानते हैं. और लेकिन मेरा हिंदी लिटरेचर का मुझे बहुत शौक था, और बहुत बड़े लेखक हिंदी पंजाब से हुए जिन्होंने हिंदी में अपना बहुत नाम बनाया. मैं जिनकी बहुत बड़ी रीडर थी उनकी. तो एक बार एक बहुत छोटा सा एक कॉलेज में प्रतियोगिता हुई.
Sorry, if I could just stop you there, Anjali. Sorry, Anjali, if I can just stop you and I'll just translate what you were just saying, and then we can carry on. So Anjali was just saying that the college that she attended was a very elite college, and she ended up studying commerce, but she had a passion for reading Hindi literature for a long time, and there were Hindi writers who really inspired her. Carry on, Anjali.
लेकिन फिर भी मैंने ये नहीं सोचा था कि कभी मैं किसी बड़े पत्रिका में छपूंगी. इसके लिए मैं प्रोफेसर राकेश कुमार जी को इसका श्रेय देना चाहूँगी. वो मेरे कॉलेज में हिंदी डिपार्टमेंट में पढ़ाते थे. एक बार उनसे ऐसे ही इंटरेक्शन हुआ और लिटरेचर की बात चली, और जब मैंने उनको बताया कि उनको पता चला कि मैं हंस पत्रिका पढ़ती हूँ, तो वो थोड़ा सा हैरान हुए. उनको लगा कि इस एलीट कॉलेज में जहाँ बच्चों को बहुत ज़्यादा लिटरेचर में दिलचस्पी रखने वाले बच्चे बहुत कम हैं, फिर मैं तो कॉमर्स बैकग्राउंड से हूँ और फिर भी मैं हिंदी लिटरेचर में पढ़ रही हूँ. क्योंकि उस समय हंस जो छप रहा था, उसके संपादक स्वर्गीय राजेंद्र यादव जी थे. उस समय हंस एक इसलिए ज़्यादा पॉपुलर था कि बहुत पॉलिटिकल बहसें होती थी उन दिनों, हंस पे छपती थी. और हंस ने एक बड़ा मंच दिया दलितों को, औरतों को, उनकी आवाज़ को. तो उनको इसलिए थोड़ा हैरानी हुई कि मैं हंस पढ़ती हूँ. उसके बाद उनके साथ मेरी अक्सर बातचीत होती रही. फिर उन्होंने ही एक बार मुझे एनकरेज किया. मैंने उनको दिखाया कि मैंने ये कहानी लिखी है. उन्होंने मुझे कहा कि तुम हंस में क्यों नहीं भेजती, और सचमुच मुझे बिल्कुल यकीन नहीं था कि ये कहानी कभी छपेगी. तो उसके बाद कहानी छपी.
So I'll just translate, but yeah, I want to ask you a bit more about that. But Anjali was just saying that there was somebody in her Hindi department called Rakesh Kumar, and because it's an elite college, the students were not many of the girls interested in reading a magazine, a literary magazine like Hans magazine. Anjali is saying that it was actually a very political magazine. There were lots of arguments and debates in the magazine. It was run at the time by Rajendra Yadav. And so this teacher was very surprised that Anjali read Hans, also being the fact that she was studying commerce. So he encouraged her a lot in not just her reading, but also to send her story to Hans when she did write a story. Anjali, I wanted to ask you about what actually motivated you to write the story in the first place. Was it an experience, or what you saw, or was it some strong emotions?
Yes, Kavita. This story came from my own experience. I want to admit that was quite a bitter experience with that college. but it didn't end up there. I planned to write about the incident, and I wrote it, and the story got published. And और इस स्टोरी को बहुत ज़्यादा पाठकों ने बहुत ज़्यादा इस तरह से भी लिया कि बहुत ज़्यादा पढ़ी गई ये स्टोरी, इस पर बहुत अच्छा रिस्पांस मिला। उसके बाद मुझे बहुत हिम्मत मिली, मैंने और भी कहानियाँ लिखी।
Okay, and I wanted to ask you, after that, as you went on to write more stories, do you think that you were motivated by what you were reading or inspired by what you were reading, or more your experiences, the things that you were seeing around you? What do you think was motivating you as you wrote?
मुझे लगता है कविता के लिखने का जो मेरे अंदर मुझे एक प्रेरणा मिली, ये उससे भी बहुत पहले की बात थी। उस समय पंजाब में आतंकवाद का दौर था। अब हम लोग जानते हैं कि पंजाब ने बहुत देर तक एक टेररिज्म का टाइम देखा है। तब मैं बहुत छोटी थी, स्कूल में थी, लेकिन वो अनुभव इतने ज़्यादा तीव्र थे कि वो मेरे जहन में बहुत देर रहे। और मुझे अभी तक याद है कि मेरी पहली कविता का जन्म तभी हुआ था। मैंने अपनी पहली कविता तब लिखी थी जब वो भयानक टेररिज्म का टाइम था पंजाब में। तो मुझे लगता है कि जो आसपास मेरे चल रहा था, क्लैश चल रहा था, पॉलिटिकल क्लैश था वो, और धार्मिक क्लैश था। और उसके बाद फिर जो मेरा अपना स्ट्रगल था, कॉलेज जाना और अपनी बस्ती की लड़कियों को, बच्चों को, अपने लिए दलितों को लड़ते हुए देखना, उन सब से मुझे लगता है कि मेरी रचनाओं का जन्म हुआ।
So Anjali was just saying that she probably started. Anjali, how old were you when you wrote your first story?
I wrote my first poem when I was, I think, might be 12 or 13 years old.
So yeah, when Anjali was 12, 13, she was inspired to write in the 1980s, when politically there was a lot happening in the 80s in Punjab, with the terrorism, but also the attack on Sikhs at that time. And being in that kind of environment really had a big deep impact on Anjali. So this is something that inspired her to start writing, and she wrote her first story. But then also seeing in the basti that she lived in, the struggle of Dalits around her, of boys and girls, but especially the lives of the girls. She wanted to write about those lives of those around her. And also, Anjali, you talked about your mentor, this mentor at college, but I know in the past we've also talked about a couple of other mentors as well, and the role that they've played in your life.
Yes, I would like to mention them. मेरे पापा कम्युनिस्ट विचारधारा से थे, तो उनकी अपनी भी जो सोच थी वो बहुत, उन्होंने भी मुझे बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस किया, उन्होंने मुझे बहुत एनकरेज किया। वो हमेशा देखना चाहते थे कि मैं कुछ करूं, कुछ आगे बढ़ूं, और मैं कभी हार नहीं मानूं। जिन लोगों के बीच में से मैं निकली थी, वो हमेशा इस तरह से देखते थे कि मैं कुछ ऐसा करूं, मैं कुछ ऐसी बनूं कि वो लोग मुझसे इंस्पायर हों। तो उन्होंने हमेशा मुश्किल टाइम में भी मेरा बहुत साथ दिया। और जब उन्हें पता चला कि मैंने पहली कविता लिखी है, तो वो बहुत खुश हुए। उन्होंने मुझे अभी तक याद है कि एक नई डायरी खरीद करके दी और बोला कि तुम्हें लिखना चाहिए, तुम आगे भी लिखना, हमेशा इसको छोड़ना नहीं लिखना। तो ये पापा का एनकरेजमेंट था। उसके अलावा मेरे चाचा प्रोफेसर राम गोपाल सागर, वो गवर्नमेंट कॉलेज कपूरथला में पढ़ाते थे। उन्होंने एक्चुअली साहित्य की जो एक खिड़की है, लिटरेचर की जो एक विंडो है, उनकी वजह से मेरे जीवन में खुली। उनका घर, मुझे अभी भी याद है कि घर में इतना सामान नहीं था जितनी किताबें थी, तो एक लाइब्रेरी पूरी उनके घर में रहती थी। जो मेरे लिए हमेशा खुली रहती थी। मैं जो चाहूँ वहाँ से ले आऊँ, जो चाहे पढ़ना चाहूँ पढ़ूँ। तो उनका भी बहुत बड़ा योगदान रहा कि मैं लिटरेचर मेरे जीवन में एक बहुत बड़ी अहमियत बनी लिटरेचर की।
So Anjali was just talking about, apart from her teacher in the college, 2 other mentors that have played a big role in encouraging her to write. One of these is her father, who is a communist, or was a communist, and he really encouraged her and supported her when he discovered that she loved writing. When she wrote her first story, he really encouraged her to continue to write and bought her a diary to write in, and to never give up. And so that support has a special place in her heart. And apart from that, she also has an uncle, Professor Ram Gopal Sagar, who she was able to go to his house at any time, and she says he had more books than any other possession. His house was a library in a way, and it was completely open and available to her, so she could go there anytime to read those books, and that was something that really started giving her the space to be able to just access those books and read them. Anjali, I mean, we've talked about this often as well. It's interesting that the 3 kind of figures that you talk about who have really inspired you and encouraged you are men. But the same, and I don't know about the literature you're reading, if it was by men or women, but one of the things that really strikes me about your writing is how deeply connected it is to the lives of women, and in particular Dalit women. And it feels as if there's so much compassion and empathy that you there's something really driving you about really going in deep in the experiences and feelings and emotions of these female characters. So yeah, how would you say that connects to the role of these mentors, and what you ended up writing about? Was that a journey?
Yes, Kavita, it was a journey, and I want to mention one thing. It was really very complicated. At that time, 3 men were encouraging me in my life to go ahead, and they were supporting me in everything. Uh, but what was pinching me, what was really coming in my stories, that was the life of women I was seeing, I was watching in my life around me. The women around me were not that strong. They were not they didn't have that fighting spirit which those men had. I was really wanted to. I was looking at those women. Why they have not raised a voice. तो मुझे ऐसे लगता था कि बहुत मुझे it took a little bit of time to understand the thing that men were always privileged than women in my life. I have seen the women around me, they didn't have that much chance to grow, to get educated, to be independent. तो वो चीज़ जो थी वो मुझे हमेशा अंदर से पिंच करती थी कि मुझे ऐसा हमेशा लगता था कि मुझे मेल्स ने बहुत सपोर्ट किया है मेरी लाइफ में, लेकिन मुझे इस चीज़ को असल में समझने में बहुत टाइम लगा कि मेरे जीवन में जो औरतें थी वो उतनी उनका कंट्रीब्यूशन बहुत ज़्यादा था उन मेल से। तो मुझे लगता है कि जो चीज़ मुझे आगे बढ़ा रही थी कि मुझे कुछ करना है, वो औरतें थी जो मुझे पीछे से एक तरह से कहिए कि पुश कर रही थी कि हमारे जैसा जीवन से तुम्हें थोड़ा बेहतर करना है। तुम्हें they were in pain and they were trying to tell me you have to go ahead, तुम्हें इस तरह का जीवन नहीं जीना है जैसा हम जी रहे हैं। तो और फिर जिनमें मुझे लगता है, जैसे हमेशा मुझे लगा कि मेरे पापा जो हैं वो मेरी लाइफ में बहुत बड़ा सपोर्ट हैं। बहुत दिनों बाद, बहुत टाइम बाद मुझे लगा कि नहीं, असल सपोर्ट मेरी माँ थी, जिनको मैं नहीं देख पा रही थी। उनका कंट्रीब्यूशन मेरे शायद पापा से ज़्यादा बड़ा था, क्योंकि मैं हमेशा देखती थी कि वो घर में काम कर रही हैं, हमेशा घर में काम कर रही हैं, और उनको ऐसे मान लिया जाता है कि वो काम करने के लिए हैं बस। शी इज़ लाइक अ टूल इन द हाउस, कि हम लोगों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए, हमें पालने के लिए, आगे बढ़ाने के लिए हमेशा वो कहीं दिखाई नहीं दे रही हैं, जबकि वो ज़्यादा काम कर रही हैं हमारे लिए। तो ये चीज़ मुझे बहुत बाद में जाकर के रियलाइज़ हुई कि नहीं, क्रेडिट सारा शायद उन औरतों को नहीं मिलता है जितना वो हमारे लिए कर रही होती हैं। You can translate.
So yeah, of course. So I mean, Anjali was sharing a lot of that in English as well, but she was sharing that it's for a long time she didn't recognize or see the role of women in her life. She was able to see the support of the men and the encouragement and the role that they played, but for example, her father, but she wasn't able to see what her mom was doing, and she said that so often women end up working it seems as if they're working in the background, and they're holding things together, and they're encouraging and supporting, but that's not always recognized. So it took her time to see that actually her mom had supported her even more than her father, and that credit isn't always given to the women. And I think that really comes through in your stories, Anjali, that you're able to see, you're able to really depict women who are not always at the forefront, but that politics which perhaps is not dramatic, but the kind of everyday politics of life and of resisting and of struggling. There's a couple of short stories I think that really kind of capture this, and one of them, since we're talking about your mother, is a really touching story, which if anybody wants to read it, the whole story is online on the bilingual window in Hindi and in English. But perhaps I could ask you, Anjali, to read an extract of it. The story is called Ma Darti Hai, Ma is scared. And it really captures this kind of dual thing of the encouragement and support and love and pride for her daughter, as well as the fear of her daughter navigating the world, which she knows is not a safe place for her daughter. So yeah, Anjali, do you want to just share in Hindi some of the story?
Yes. I would like to tell you that after Itihas was published in Hans, my second story was also published in Hans, that was माँ डरती है, और इसका भी बहुत अच्छा रिस्पांस मुझे मिला। मैं कुछ एक्सट्रैक्ट पढ़ना चाहूँगी इसमें से। इस भीड़ भरे बाजार की तो बात की ही तो बात है, जब एक दिन वो कॉलेज जा रही थी। एक स्कूटर वाला उसके पास से अंधाधुंध चलता हुआ सट कर निकल गया। उसे कपड़ा फटने की आवाज सुनाई दी। उसने देखा उसकी कमीज की पूरी बाजू कंधे तक फट गई है, जो उसके बाह को पूरा नंगा कर चुकी है। उसने गुस्से से आगे बढ़ गए स्कूटर वाले को देखा। उसे कभी भूल नहीं सकती वो जलील और जहरीली हंसी। वो अब कुछ नहीं कर सकती थी। वो अब बहुत दूर आगे निकल चुका था। उसने अपना आधा दुपट्टा बाह के ऊपर लपेट लिया और आधा गले में ही रहने दिया। बड़ी मुश्किल से वो कॉलेज पहुंची थी। कितना अपमानित महसूस हुआ था उसे। एक बार तो उसे दुनिया की हर शय से नफरत सी हो गई थी। उसके आसपास के लोग कुछ खुश हुए थे, कुछ उसकी नंगी बाह को देख रहे थे। उसे लगा सबके चेहरों पर आंखें नहीं, कांटे उगे थे। हमने ऐसा कौन सा गुनाह किया है कि हम ये जलालत सहें? उसके अंदर गुस्सा ही गुस्सा भर गया था। इस तरह की घटनाओं पर घर वालों या सुनने वालों का जवाब अक्सर यही होता है, तुमने उसे जूते क्यों नहीं मारे, तुमने उसे थप्पड़ क्यों नहीं मारा। पर कितनी लड़कियां असल में ऐसे लोगों से भिड़ पाती हैं। वो नहीं समझा सकती उन्हें कि वह किस किस को जूते से मारे। छोटी बस्तियों से आने वाली लड़कियां, दूर दराज गांव देहातों से आने वाली लड़कियां रोज न जाने क्या क्या झेलती हैं। क्या रास्ते भर में वो अपना जूता उतार कर चलें? पर वो चाहती ज़रूर हैं। वो लड़कियां चाहती हैं कि 21वीं सदी की ओर बढ़ते और कीड़े मकोड़ों की तरह विचरते इस समाज के मुंह पर थप्पड़ मारना, जिसने अभी तक स्त्री को देह से अलग अलग करके समझना शुरू नहीं किया। खैर, उस दिन भी जसबीर इस बाजार से बचती बचाती निकल कर
Can I stop
yes,
you there,
yes,
Anjali? Let me translate that, yeah?
okay.
That day, as Jasbir was cycling to college, a random scooter driving past came very close to her. She heard the sound of cloth tearing. One entire sleeve of her kameez was torn off her shoulder, revealing her arm. She glared after the scooter driver, who had already driven off. She could still hear his poisonous laughter, but she couldn't do anything since he had already gone too far ahead. Tearing her dupatta, she wrapped half of it around her arm and left the other half around her neck. With great difficulty, she reached her college. She felt humiliated, full of hatred for every man in the world. It seemed to her as if people around her were happy that this had happened to her, that they were all looking at her bare arm. It was as if, instead of eyes, those people had thorns sprouting from their faces. What crime have we committed, she thought, that we should put up with this behavior? She was full of anger. So often, the reactions of family members and others when such incidents happened were, "Why didn't you hit him with your fight? Why didn't you hit him with your shoe? Why didn't you slap him?" But who exactly were these girls supposed to fight? They wouldn't know where to start. Girls from such bastis, from faraway places, from villages, put up with all kinds of things every day. Were they expected to walk around with a shoe ready in their hand at all times? These girls have their own dreams. They want to move into the 21st century, leaving behind the creepy society they live in, which still doesn't see women as more than their bodies, women as more than their bodies. They want to reject this society, to slap it in the face. I also wanted to hear from another story of yours, Anjali. Sela.
Yes. It was.
Oh, yes, sure.
Should I read the last? Okay.
Sure.
This is the last
read it.
part of story. हाँ. जसवीर ने फिर देखा, माँ का चेहरा मुरझाया हुआ था। वो बहुत बीमार सी लग रही थी। उसे फिर एक बार उस पर दया आई। माँ, तुम बैठो यहाँ पर। बताओ, तुम्हें आखिर क्या हो गया है? तुम्हें डर क्यों लगता है? बेटी, तुम्हें नहीं पता इस दुनिया का, समाज में औरत होना इतना आसान नहीं। किसी का कुछ पता नहीं, मन में क्या पाल ले। वे लड़के न जाने किस घर के थे, बैर पड़ने में समय नहीं लगता। जसवीर अंदर तक तड़प उठी। अच्छा, तो तुम ये सोचती रहती हो, सहना किसे कहते हैं तुम्हें तो पता होगा। इन लड़कों को क्या पता है कैसा लगता है एक लड़की को जब उस पर फप्तियाँ कसी जाती हैं, गंदे इशारे किए जाते हैं, गंदी गालियाँ बकी जाती हैं, उसको ठोकर मारी जाती है, उस पर जहरीली हंसी फेंकी जाती है, उसका कपड़ा फाड़ा जाता है, उसके अंगों को छुआ जाता है। क्या हम तमाशा है माँ, या चलती फिरती लाशें? आज ये सड़क पर कपड़ा फाड़ते हैं, कल बाजार में नंगा करेंगे, हमें तालियां बजाएंगे। क्या मैं तमाशा हूँ? माँ आश्चर्यचकित और भयभीत जसबीर के फड़कते हुए होठों को देखती रही। ये लोग ऐसे घूरते हैं जैसे असंख्य गंदे लिजलिजे कीड़े मेरे शरीर पर रेंग रहे हैं। बेटी की बातें को सुनकर माँ के रोंगटे खड़े हो गए। मैं घर में कैद नहीं होना चाहती। माँ, ज्यादा सोचा मत करो, किसी से डरा भी ना करो। जसबीर हंसती है। माँ भी, अब तुम हाथ मुंह धो लो, मैं खाना गर्म करती हूँ। अब माँ उस लड़की से भी डरने सी लगी है।
Thank you, Anjali. So this is jumping ahead to the very end of the story, which is an exchange between the main character Jasbir and her mother, and the framing of the story is her mother at the beginning being concerned and scared when her daughter hasn't come back from college, and then when she returns at the end, this is the conversation between them. There are tears filling Ma's eyes. Jasbir sees her mother's sad face and seems to feel bad. Ma, sit here, she says. Tell me, what happens to you? Why do you feel scared? My child, you don't know about this world. It's not easy being a woman in this society. You can't trust anyone, can't know what's lurking in their minds. Who knows what family those boys belong to? Hatred can attack at any time. Distress arises from deep inside Jasbir. Ah, so this is what you've been thinking. Ma, do you know how it feels to put up with all of these? These boys don't know how it feels for a girl when she's restricted, when dirty gestures are made towards her, when rude words are thrown at her, when she's pushed, when poisonous laughter is directed towards her, when her clothes are torn, when her body is touched. Are we a spectacle, Ma? Are we only walking, talking bodies, objects? Today they tear our clothes. Tomorrow, in the middle of the market, they'll take our clothes off and they'll clap. Ma, am I a show to watch? Surprised and afraid, Ma keeps looking at Jasbir's moving lips. The way that these men stare at me, Jasbir continues, it feels like hundreds of tiny dirty ants crawling over my body. Listening to her daughter's words, the hair on Ma's body stands on end. I don't want to be imprisoned in the house, says Jasbir. Her voice becomes more gentle. Ma, she says, don't worry so much. And don't be scared of anyone. All of a sudden, she laughs. Slowly, hesitantly, Ma laughs too. Theek hai, now go and wash your hands and face, she says to Jasbir, and I'll go and get your food ready. Ma has now also started to feel scared of her daughter. So I think that extract really captures what I was saying, which is the kind of deep kind of articulation of her mother and the conflicting emotions within her, whether it's fear and at the same time a kind of pride and respect and encouragement of her daughter that you really get across here. Something else I wanted to ask you, Anjali, and I know this has come up in our conversations earlier, is about the fact that you said to me that in your story it's really important to you that you're writing about the lives of Dalit girls, even though it's not something that you necessarily foreground. And I wanted to ask you about that, but also to ask it in the context of perhaps feminism generally, and how perhaps it's dominated in literature maybe by upper caste perspectives, and how this need to kind of articulate caste and where caste is erased is often, it's something that has to be overt in for example, Dalit literature, whereas this the experience of being an upper caste woman often becomes kind of almost universal or it's the universal experience. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
हाँ कविता, जब ये कहानी छपी बहुत पहले की बात है, मुझे लगता है शायद एक जो कॉन्सेप्ट एक जो बाद में आया है, दलित स्त्रीवाद, द इश्यूज ऑफ दलित वुमेन, मुझे लगता है कि इस कहानी के ज़रिए मैंने वही दिखाया है कि दलित जो स्त्री है उसके जो मुद्दे हैं, उसके जो इश्यूज हैं, वो अपर कास्ट औरतों से कहीं ना कहीं अलग हैं। मैं ऐसा नहीं कहती कि दोनों में कोई सिमिलरिटी नहीं है, सिमिलरिटी है, ऐसा है, लेकिन जो अपर कास्ट औरतों के इश्यूज थे जो उन्होंने उठाए, उसमें दलित स्त्रियों के इश्यूज कहीं गायब दिखते हैं बहुत बार। जैसे ये लड़की है, दलित लड़की है, एक बहुत रिमोट एरिया से आती है, वहाँ से स्ट्रगल करती है, पढ़ती है, इसी तरह जो दलित स्त्रियां हैं, और मुझे लगता है कि उनके जो इश्यूज हैं बहुत बार अपर कास्ट औरतों द्वारा एड्रेस नहीं होते हैं। अगर हम इनको कंपेयर करें तो हम देखते हैं कि दलित स्त्रियां जो हैं, अपर कास्ट औरत के लिए वो कहती है कि मैं काम करने के लिए स्ट्रगल करती हूँ, मुझे अपनी आइडेंटिटी बनाने के लिए स्ट्रगल करना पड़ता है, मुझे काम करने के लिए लड़ना पड़ता है, घर से बाहर निकलने के लिए लड़ना पड़ रहा है, मुझे नौकरी करने जाना है। लेकिन दलित औरतों की तो शायद उनकी शुरू से उनकी मजबूरियां हैं कि वो जमींदारों के खेतों में काम करती हैं या वो मजदूरी करती हैं कहीं, उनके लिए वर्किंग कंडीशंस नहीं है वहाँ पे, उनके राइट्स नहीं है, जो एक मिनिमम एक औरत को काम करने के लिए चाहिए, उनको क्रच चाहिए, उनके बच्चे देखने वाला कोई नहीं है, वो सड़क पर ही बच्चे भी पड़े हैं, वो वहाँ पर वो भी काम कर रही है या खेतों में वो काम कर रही है। तो मुझे लगता है कि जो दलित स्त्री है उसके इश्यूज जो हैं उन बहुत बार पीछे रह जाते हैं। अगर हम एजुकेशन का देखें तो उसको एजुकेशन उसके लिए एजुकेशन उतनी आसानी से उपलब्ध नहीं है जितनी अपर कास्ट औरतों के लिए शुरू से रही है। ठीक है, उनको पढ़ने की इजाज़त नहीं थी पर उनके घर में पढ़ने का माहौल था एटलीस्ट। लेकिन जो दलित स्त्रियां हैं उनके लिए पढ़ना तो बहुत दूर की बात थी, उनको बहुत लड़ना पड़ा इस चीज़ के लिए भी। हम सब जानते हैं कि कितना बड़ी इसके लिए फाइट रही है। और भी चीज़ देखें, आज भी हम इस समय भी हम नज़र मारें तो कितनी औरतें हैं जर्नलिज्म में, कितनी दलित औरतें हैं जो उनके जो दलित औरतों के मुद्दों को आगे लेके आ पाएँ, उनके मुद्दों को उठाएं। ऐसी जर्नलिज्म में कितनी औरतें हैं दलित औरतें। अभी बहुत ऐसे सेक्टर हैं, बहुत ऐसे क्षेत्र हैं जहाँ पर दलित औरतें बिल्कुल गायब हैं। तो उनके लिए बोलने वाला कोई नहीं है। अपर कास्ट औरतें भी उनके लिए नहीं बोलती हैं बहुत बार। तो ये एक गैप है मुझे लगता है। दूसरा, दलित स्त्री को अब दलित मेल के साथ भी लड़ना पड़ रहा है। इस कहानी में ही आप देखते हैं कि वह दलित बस्ती से जाने वाली लड़की हर तरह का जो है छेड़खानी झेल रही है। उसको बाहर निकलने के लिए अपनी बस्ती में ही स्ट्रगल करना पड़ रहा है। कोई नहीं चाहता है, दलित पुरुष भी उसके रास्ते में आते हैं। तो ये सिर्फ यहीं तक सीमित नहीं है। मुझे लगता है कि दलित पुरुष ने भी बहुत बार वो दलित स्त्री को समझने में भूल करता है। तो वो खुद शोषण का शिकार है लेकिन वो नहीं समझ पाता है स्त्री के मन को, स्त्री के स्ट्रगल को वो नहीं समझ पाता है। तो ये एक डबल लड़ाई है दलित स्त्री की।
Thanks. I'll just share what I could of that. So you were talking about the fact that the voice of Dalit women is not represented or articulated. Her concerns aren't the same as upper caste women. Her fight and her struggle is very different. And it's just not addressed by upper caste women and can't be. And you gave some examples. For example, maybe upper caste women have been fighting to be able to work, but the conditions of Dalit women have been very different. For example, being working on the land and not having rights, and the struggle to also look after her children. Her circumstances have been very different. It can't all be captured as one experience for all women. And she's fighting in a caste structured society and facing discrimination on that basis. You also gave the example of education and how it's a struggle to get to that place for Dalit girls or Dalit women to get an education, and how few Dalit women there are in so-called mainstream society, for example, in journalism, who could give a voice to other Dalit women and their concerns. And you said that Anjali also said that the struggle is twofold. It's with this casteist society, but also she's also fighting a parallel fight with Dalit men as well, where who are also part of a structure or system, patriarchal. So, for example, in her story that we heard from, the Jasbir, the main character, is also struggling to assert herself in her basti, where perhaps the right to study and to educate herself is resisted by the men in her basti as well. So basically, something else that I wanted to ask, continuing on this point, when you were saying about the fact that there aren't Dalit journalists or and only women, those women can represent and articulate their own concerns. I wanted to ask a bit more about this, Anjali, in terms of not just journalism, but also in publishing, in the process of editing, and even translating. And I say this with a consideration of my location as well, and the limitations of having your work published or edited or translated in upper caste context with upper caste editors. Is that something that you think impacts the process of publishing, of writing, of how your work comes across in the world?
हाँ कविता, एक अगर मैं थोड़ा सा पीछे जाना चाहूँगी कि अगर हम दलित लिटरेचर का डेवलपमेंट देखते हैं तो हमसे पहले जो जनरेशन आई है, उस जनरेशन में गाँव का बैकग्राउंड है। गाँव क्योंकि अपने आप में जो कास्ट जो स्ट्रेटिफिकेशन है, क्लासिफिकेशन है, उसको और ज़्यादा मजबूती से फॉलो करता है। वहाँ पर और ज़्यादा ब्रूटल हो जाता है ये जो कास्ट सिस्टम है। तो उन लोगों का स्ट्रगल उस परिवेश में है, उस एनवायरनमेंट में है जो गाँव का एनवायरनमेंट है। तो उनकी कहानियों में, उनके रचनाओं में, उनके बायोग्राफीज़ में वो स्ट्रगल दिखता है। उसके बाद जो हमारी जनरेशन आती है, इसमें कुछ हम लोग ऐसे राइटर आए हैं जिन्होंने दलित राइटर जिन्होंने शहरों का जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, कास्ट बेस्ड डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, उसकी बात की है कि शहरों में हम आए तो हमें बहुत कुछ गाँव से बेटर मिला, लेकिन यहाँ पर थोड़ा फॉर्म बदल जाता है डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का। तो I would like to say one thing, like you can recognize a black, you can recognize a Muslim, but how to recognize a person by his caste, by her caste, है ना? तो उसके लिए they try to ask them the questions like you are from which caste, so they are humiliated like this in cities. So it has not just ended. इन शहरों में आके सब कास्टिज्म खत्म नहीं हुआ है। तो ये जो एक स्ट्रगल है दलित लेखकों का, दलित लोगों का, वो कहीं भी अभी भी ख़त्म नहीं हुआ है। तो ऐसे ही मुझे लगता है कि जो दलित राइटिंग है वो पहले उन्होंने बहुत स्ट्रगल किया। शायद मुझे लगता है बहुत सारी पत्रिकाएं थी जो उनको स्पेस नहीं देना चाहती थी। ऐसे ही औरतें भी स्ट्रगल करती हैं, उनकी वॉइस को भी हर कोई जो है उससे एग्री नहीं होता था, तो उनको एक रिजेक्शन पब्लिशर से भी, मैगजीन से, पत्रिकाओं से भी मिलता रहा है, अभी तक भी है ऐसा। अभी भी कुछ बहुत ज़्यादा बदला नहीं है, लेकिन ये है कि दलित लिटरेचर ने एक अपना स्पेस बनाया है। उसने अपना स्पेस ऐसे बनाया है कि अब आप उसको इग्नोर नहीं कर सकते। तो ये उसका स्ट्रगल है, उसकी लड़ाई है, जिसको कुछ प्रोग्रेसिव थॉट के लोगों ने भी, अपर कास्ट हों या दूसरे हों, उन्होंने उनको सपोर्ट किया। जैसे हंस का बहुत बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन रहा है। हंस ने एक ऐसा प्लेटफॉर्म दिया जिसमें दलितों को, स्त्रियों को अच्छा स्पेस मिला, अपनी बात कहने का एक ओपन मंच मिला, जो मुझे लग रहा है कि उस समय काफ़ी क्रिटिसाइज भी हुआ। उनको इसके लिए काफ़ी बहुत झेलना भी पड़ा, बहुत क्रिटिसिज्म झेलना पड़ा। तो ये चीज़ रही है। औरतों के हिंदी समाज मुझे लगता है अभी उतना खुला नहीं है। औरतों के लेखन को लेकर अभी भी बहुत ज़्यादा ब्लेम किया जाता है। अभी भी उनके अगर वो देह की सेक्सुअलिटी की बात करती हैं तो अभी भी पोर्नोग्राफिक बोला जाता है। तो ऐसे ही दलितों के लिखे हुए को भी कई एंगल से जज किया जाता है। नहीं, इसमें कलात्मकता नहीं है, इसमें जो एस्थेटिक मिसिंग है। तो ये अभी भी है चीज़, पहले भी रही है। तो ये एक अपना स्ट्रगल है औरतों का, दलितों का।
Thanks, Anjali. I'll try to capture that. So Anjali was talking about in some ways the history of Dalit literature and how a lot of the concerns of earlier Dalit literature was focused very much on the village and the kind of very brutal caste oppression that existed and was being resisted in villages. And of course that continues, but she's talking about the next generation, another generation of Dalit literature, which has been concerned with the discrimination that's faced in the city, which is perhaps not as brutal as in the village, but it's very much there, and it is a constant struggle. And she's pointed out that one of the things that happens is that in a city, nobody necessarily can tell what somebody's caste is. So perhaps you can tell, for example, if somebody is Muslim and that, you know, discrimination happens for people on the basis of religion, but with caste it's not always apparent. So she's saying that it can happen in these subtle ways where people will ask, what is your surname, what is your caste, and there is this constant humiliation, and that battle is ongoing, and she's saying that the voices of Dalits have been silenced, of women have been silenced, Dalit women have been silenced, and there's been a lot of rejection in terms of literature, and it's been hard to put that work out there, but still Dalit literature has made its own space very strongly, and people who have been supportive or progressive have played a role. So Hans magazine is an example of a magazine that for her has given a space where she could earlier publish her stories, and it gave a space for women or Dalit writers. But at the same time, she's saying that the kind of that society, but also the literary world is still very much discriminatory, and literature is also rejected on basis such as a woman's concerns, whether they're personal, whether it's sexuality, can be dismissed as this is pornographic, or Dalit literature can be rejected as being not being aesthetic. And something that Anjali and I do often talk about, and it's there in our conversations, is this kind of personal and political and how they weave together, and there's no separation. You can't separate them, and so you can't talk about aesthetics or politics separately. And how you often, this is not a translation, but I'm just talking about the way that, you know, we do discuss how the politics of for example, upper caste writing, male writing is very much there, but it's erased and normalized and seen as aesthetic. This has been a way of silencing this literature. Anjali, I think we're running out of time, and so I just want to wrap up. I mean, there were so many more questions I wanted to ask you. We want to ask. See if there's any questions, so maybe we can continue our conversation after seeing if we have any questions. One of the things I did want to ask you as well is about writing in Hindi rather than Punjabi, because you've come, being from Punjab, I think Punjabi is the language you grew up speaking, the language of your home, but maybe we can come back to that, but let's see if we have any questions.
Thank you very much, Kavita, and thank you, Anjali, for this really amazing conversation. We do have a couple of questions on the chat, so I'm going to read them out for you. We've got one from Nicole to Anjali. It says, in your stories, you focus on domestic stories which are filled with great tension. The familiar becomes alienating. Could you tell us more about your style of writing, please?
Anjali, I don't want to translate.
Yes, थोड़ा सा.
निकोल पूछ रही है कि तुम्हारी कहानियों में जो डोमेस्टिक स्पेस होता है ना, गेस जब हम बात कर रहे थे औरत की राइटिंग के बारे में, यही हम पॉइंट को एक्सप्लोर कर रहे थे कि जो लोग सोचते ये आम चीज़ें हैं या आम डोमेस्टिक लाइफ है, तुम्हारी राइटिंग में वो जैसे अलग सा दिखता है, उसको शायद इम्पोर्टेंस मिलती है, उसको नई नज़र, अलग सी नज़र से तुम दिखाती हो अपनी कहानियों में। ये इंटेंशनल है, ये तुम्हारे लिए ज़रूरी है? इसके बारे में कुछ कह सकते हो?
हाँ, मुझे लगता है कविता कि मैंने जैसे कहा ना कि मेरी लाइफ में साइलेंटली जिन औरतों का मुझे बनाने में रोल रहा है, द वुमेन हु मेड मी व्हाट आई एम टुडे, वो मुझे लगता है उनकी लाइफ मुझे हॉन्ट करती है, उनका स्ट्रगल मुझे हॉन्ट करता है। मैंने उन औरतों को स्ट्रगल करते देखा है, तो वो उनकी घरेलू लाइफ, उनका शोषण, उनका एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, उनका स्ट्रगल, वो सब मुझे ज़्यादा दिखता है बजाय और चीज़ों के, और तरह का जो एक्सप्लॉयटेशन है औरतों का, जो कह लीजिए या अपर कास्ट है या थोड़ी प्रिविलेज्ड औरतें हैं। तो मुझे उन औरतों का स्ट्रगल जो है, जिनको मैंने बचपन से देखा है अपने आसपास, वो ज़्यादा मेरी कहानियों में आया है, मुझे लगता है।
So Anjali is just saying, and I guess it's touching on what we've already been talking about, that she's deeply, deeply touched by the women that she has seen around her growing up, and their struggle and their pain, and she's haunted by this. And so through her writing, it is an effort to articulate that pain, those lives, those struggles. It's a really important part. So in a way, she is making what perhaps is not necessarily seen or recognized. She is bringing it to the forefront through her writing and highlighting it, which may seem alienating, I guess, but it's just bringing up what is always there, but it's not necessarily seen.
Thank you.
And is there any other questions?
There's a question from earlier on, just a clarifying question, I suppose, from Ravi, asking where's the link to the complete story, Madati High? He didn't get that part.
So it's on Bilingual Window, which is a website. So if you just Google Bilingual Window and Anjali Kajal and Ma is Scared, which is the English translation, you should be able to find it, but I'm sure that there'll be a way of sharing it as well separately. Are there any more questions? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, we can share this link with all the participants after this event. That's no problem.
Sure. Are there any more questions? Because then I could ask this question about language, if there's...
It's just a question about what are you both working at the moment with?
Okay, Anjali?
Can you repeat the question?
अभी क्या कर रहे हो काम?
I am employed in a government-owned company in India. I am a manager there, and I am raising 2 kids, trying to continue with my writing, still struggling with just that's my life. That's my life.
Actually, this is something I did want to talk about as well, and I know we didn't have time to touch on everything, but I did want to talk about this, Anjali, which is about kind of there's this idea of living a writer's life, which often comes from a place of power and privilege, a kind of pure life where maybe you write full time, or somehow you have the money to be able to do that. Perhaps you don't have a family. So I wanted to talk to you about this as well. This the journey of a lived life, and the struggle of just finding the time and the space to be able to write, but at the same time how that struggle also feeds into your writing, because it connects you to the people that you're writing about and others' lives who, that is filled with this struggle. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, Kavita, I would like to say that I was born in a basti, in a small basti. Then I moved to a city, main city, Ludhiana. And after spending 28 years of my life there, After marriage, I shifted to Delhi, which is a cosmopolitan city. I have grown a lot. This was really a very journey. I can say I have learned a lot, and I have seen a lot. I have grown a lot. So that can be seen in my stories also. Now I am a mother. My writing, it has affected my writing in a many way. When you change place, when you meet people from other regions, it really gives you a lot of. It changes your point of view, and it gives a lot of experience to you. You see the world in a different way. You are not now. You are not limited to a small place. और motherhood होने का after being a mother, मुझे लगता है वो एक different struggle है. I would like to tell कि maintaining between job and family and kids and continuing with your writing, ये एक अलग struggle है औरतों का, हम औरतों का. तो इस पर भी मुझे लगता है मेरी कहानियों में वो आगे मेरी writing में reflect होता रहेगा.
So Anjali did share that mostly in English, but at the end, just saying how having a family, having a full-time job, Anjali works with BSNL and raising children, and I have to say, Anjali really is really passionate about how she raises her children, and throughout all of that, to also struggle to write and make the space to write. That struggle is also reflected in the work itself. If we don't have any questions, I just wanted to, there's no more questions. I just wanted to kind of to wrap up by just touching on your more recent writing, Anjali, and the concerns of that, especially in the current climate that we're in, and how that's influencing your writing, and if you think things are changing or if they are just the same. Would you be able to talk a bit about that?
Yes, you can see in India, current political environment is going through a lot of changes. We have seen Rohit Vemula's protest after Rohit Vemula's death, and a protest of Dalits, and even exploitation of Dalits in many places. मुझे लगता है कि ये नया नहीं है. दलित जो है पहले से ही स्ट्रगल करते आ रहे हैं. बहुत देर से उनका साइलेंटली स्ट्रगल चलता है, गांव के लेवल पे, शहरों के लेवल पर. मुझे लगता है एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशंस में तो बहुत ज़्यादा उनको झेलना पड़ता है. ऐसा नहीं है कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में एक प्रिविलेज, उनको एक प्रोविज़न दिया गया रिजर्वेशन का और उससे सारी समस्याएं हल हो गई. उससे उनको एम्पावरमेंट मिला है, बहुत मिला है, उनको आगे बढ़ने के लिए एक रास्ता मिला है. लेकिन उनका स्ट्रगल अभी भी जो माइंडसेट है, अपर कास्ट माइंडसेट है, डिस्क्रिमिनेटिंग माइंडसेट है, उससे उनकी लड़ाई अभी भी ख़त्म नहीं हुई है. वो लगातार चल रही है. तो लेकिन अभी करंट एनवायरनमेंट ये कि सोशल मीडिया ने एक पावर दी है उनको. सोशल मीडिया है, और अभी जर्नलिज्म में भी बहुत से दलित हैं जो वो भी अवेयर हैं, जो उनके लिए आवाज़ उठाने वाले लोग हैं. तो ये काफ़ी माहौल एक बना हुआ है. तो वो मुझे करता है बहुत, उससे मुझे लिखने का मन करता है. मेरी 2 रिसेंट कहानियाँ हैं, उनमें भी मैंने इन चीज़ों का, एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशंस में जो स्ट्रगल चलता है उन बच्चों का, दलितों का, आदिवासियों का, मार्जिनलाइज्ड लोगों का, लड़कियों का, उनके लिए मैं अभी भी लिखना, मुझे वो मेरी कहानियों में अभी भी चल रहा है.
So Anjali was sharing that there's nothing new in the struggle. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this, or some of it, a small glimpse of it highlighted at the moment. For example, the suicide of Rohit Vemula and the campaigns, the activism since that, highlighting that. But she's saying that these struggles, whether it's in the village or in the cities, is nothing new, and Dalits have always been struggling and resisting and fighting this for a very, very long time. So it's nothing new, even though it's being highlighted, but it is also the case that social media is giving a platform and a space for this to be highlighted, and for people to connect, and for Dalits also to connect with each other. And she's been inspired by this in her recent writing. So her last two short stories have actually both been about educational institutions, and the discrimination, the casteism within them. And in some ways, would you say, Anjali, that this takes you almost in a circle, doesn't it? Because that's what your first story was about as well, coming from an experience that you had.
Really disappoints me. Nothing has changed. What we were fighting at that time, still people are fighting. Even in the current environment, the government jobs are diminishing just, and the benefit which was given to Dalits, Adivasis, by way of constitution provisions, that is also diminishing. So this is a matter of concern. The gap between education in cities and education in villages, in government schools and private schools, is widening, which is a matter of great concern for us, because there will be more struggle for marginalized people. Their children, they won't be able to match with the education which upper caste or privileged people are giving to their children. So there is nothing much is being done for this.
Yeah. Anjali, we've got just a couple of minutes left. So is there anything else that you wanted to share? Any more thoughts that you wanted to share?
I would like to say that I was sometime there were moments when I thought this is the end. I won't be able to continue with my writing. My priorities has changed. My children, they need my attention. But there was a friend. There was a continuous force who was inspiring me for writing, for going ahead, and that is Kavita. She has been encouraging me a lot with my writing. No, you should not. You will sail through this. You should continue writing. She used to appreciate my writings, and she used to inspire me herself. So I would like to thank her so much.
Not at all, Anjali. Actually, I think that, and I know you were talking about this recently, there's a lot of people who are encouraging and inspiring you. You were saying that there's young people who are reading your stories and connecting with them in different languages and translating them and turning them into plays, because I think that your writing has always and still really connects to people and their lives and their struggles. And I really, really mean it when I say that this is what literature should do, but it very rarely does that, what your writing does, and it speaks to people for that reason. So I'm not alone. I think there's a lot of people who are pushing and encouraging you to carry on writing, even though it's not easy.
Indeed, I echo that same thought. Kavita, thank you very much for hosting this conversation. And Anjali, thank you very much for joining us today. Again, sorry for the tech difficulties, but at least we got to hear your voice, Anjali. Really happy you could join. And MELA continues tomorrow and Sunday. There's a full program of events, both at NAE and online. You can check New Art Exchange's website for more details, but the two online events that are coming up tomorrow at 4:30 British time. We have a Koali performance titled Song of the Caged Birds, and then on Sunday we've got short film screenings by Seral Murmur, and that's at 2 p.m. British time, so don't miss those. They're going to be here on YouTube as well. Hope to see you there. Hope to see you at NAE if you're local, and thank you very much for joining.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.